Okay, now it's recording. Ahora no. Okay, so the first question would be, how did you, both of you, got involved in this interesting topic of the PAS?
Go ahead, Jane.
I've been teaching parent education classes for people in legal trouble for many, many years, actually 27 years, continuously. And eventually I started a class called Fathers and Custody, and it was a new area for me entirely. It was about 10 years ago or more. And many of the fathers had parental alienation issues, although I didn't know what it was at the time. But I had two clients that I did a lot of work with, and that's how I got acquainted with them. And as a result of them and others, I wrote an article that's on my website that's gone all around the world, I think. It's called Parents Who Have Successfully Fought Parental Alienation Syndrome. And because I put the word successfully in there, it really caught on. And I heard from people, and then I was off and running. I didn't want to deal with this at all. It was just too terrible. It was too awful. But I ended up just seeming to be a magnet for these issues.
And you, Dr. Brown?
Well, similarly, I mean, I stumbled into it. I mean, I had a general kind of practice, and part of that was working with couples and families, and eventually I noticed that this strange thing was happening where people going through a divorce and a child suddenly would not want to see one of the parents with whom they once had a very close relationship, and I sort of found out more about it and became interested in it, and wrote an article. That seems to be an entree to all these things, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And one thing led to another, and it just became fascinating, really, and tragic at the same time, but that's really how I got involved.
What's your professional degree?
I have a combined degree of anthropology and psychology, actually. So I'm a little bit of a different academic background.
Mm. And you were, you studied together or with Dr. Gardner?
Yes. What happened was I'd become involved and interested in this topic and had written a few things about it, and then got invited to be on the Scientific and Professional Advisory Board of the Parental Alienation Research Foundation in Washington, D.C. So I actually went to Washington, and that's where I met Dr. Gardner and Randy Rand and Deirdre Rand and Richard Warshak and a lot of the people that are the familiar names. And then from that, he became involved in a case I was involved in. He and I did an evaluation together, and he was a very easy person to approach, and very interested and tireless too. I remember I would get emails from him at 1 in the morning, and then a follow-up phone call at 7 o'clock that same morning. He was a tireless guy, interesting guy, great sense of humor, good guy.
Good. So the white storks.
Yes,
storks.
Yes, we've been hearing those.
So yes. Yeah. How could you, both of you, define, the PAS?
My short version is, PAS, parental alienation, is any time a parent speaks badly about another parent where the child can hear it. And I think that's alienating a parent, putting the parent in a bad light. Parent alienation syndrome is where the child has heard so much of this and relentlessly and loses their reference point of the positive relationship that they had with this parent, and eventually crosses over and aligns with the most disturbed parent against the targeted parent.
And I mean, really, the reason they do that, it's a fear-based thing. They're afraid. They're essentially taught that the other parent has abandoned them, and they're put in a divided loyalty situation where they feel like they've lost one, so they gravitate towards the other, and then that becomes the avalanche. I think the thing with the whole parental alienation syndrome, and since he's the one, Gardner is the one that coined that, of course. I think he was one of those clinicians that had the ability to sort of see patterns there just almost intuitively. And he described these 8 symptoms that really very predictably show the unfolding of how this all develops. And
all development.
Yeah, it really does. It's remarkably predictive in that regard. That's why, I wrote an article that says parental alienation syndrome, how to detect it and what to do about it. And I cannot tell you how many times I've gotten calls saying, oh my gosh, it sounds like you've been looking in on my life. And I said, well, it's just because this is so very tightly patterned. And I think Gardner really nailed that very well. Since that time, Amy Baker, who's done some quantitative research on that, before she published her book, I read the manuscript and I spoke with her and I said, it sounds like you're really confirming exactly what Gardner said. And she said, well, not about. That's exactly what I'm doing. He was right on the money as far as being able to describe it.
And it's interesting that no matter how many people have come up with new versions or new ways of carving something out for themselves, nobody argues with those 8 criteria of what is parent alienation syndrome.
If you look, as a matter of fact, if you look at the Joan Kelly, Janet Johnson, if you look at their formulation of child alienation, it really is a lot of the same things, just in different words, but it's the same, really the same pattern.
Right.
Could you tell us what are these 8 symptoms?
Oh, boy, I have to list them all. I always forget one or two.
Well, the most important ones.
The first one that's always the campaign of denigration. That's when the child is engaged in a campaign of denigration against the other parent. One thing that you find when children are in the midst of their parents' divorce, they don't want to take sides. If you're doing an evaluation of a child going through that, and you try to find some sort of sense of which parent they're more aligned with, when this is not going on, children will keep their head down. They don't want to take sides. And this is just the opposite of that. It's being engaged in denigrating one parent, which is just really kind of fundamentally unnatural. That's
the most basic and the most important one of the 8.
Yes. The second one I happen to remember is weak and frivolous rationalizations for the campaign of denigration. So someone will say, during an evaluation, you might say to a child, well, how come you don't want to see your mom or your dad? And they'll say, well, their house is too messy.
Yeah.
Their house is too clean. Mm-hmm. I had one child say, well, all they want to do is take me to Disney World. And I said, what?
Something terrible.
What? I said, what? Could you repeat that, please? You're going to have to explain that. It was, so, yeah.
I understand. Oh, would you consider the PAS as a child trauma or mistreatment? I think it can be considered that way?
Both.
Or more than that?
It's horrific because you're causing children to lose their critical thinking. And it is programming, it's brainwashing, it's taking over the child's personhood, their sense of self and who they are in relation to their family and the world. They're losing 1/2 of their heritage. They're losing their grandparents, their aunts and uncles, the family friends, the culture that they come from, and they're stuck with the most disturbed person that is robbing them of this opportunity.
I think, I absolutely agree with all that. I think another thing, every child I've ever seen that has ever been in this situation, if you ask the right questions, there's a universal theme that you see over and over again, and that is they are basically taught that the parent that they are alienated doesn't love them. Mm-hmm. And I can't think of any more cruel kind of child abuse than teaching a child to believe that their parent doesn't love them, or teaching the child to believe that their parent had abused them or molested them. And think about that. Think about what would a parent to induce that kind of belief in the child about the other parent, and that's about as bad as it gets, I think.
Do you think that this behavior that the alienating father or mother has, it's something voluntarily? It's something that just is born in a natural way? You think it's something that has a structure that goes from A to Z?
Alienating parent?
Yes.
Yesterday I gave a presentation called The Pathology of an Obsessed Parental Alienator. And I believe that there are people who are so disturbed that they don't have a grasp of reality, a rational mind at all. And in fact, they don't see when they make up stories and then believe what they made up, that there's something wrong with that. And there isn't any reasoning with them because they believe that they are absolutely right. And that makes them very dangerous because they don't have a rational mind. And they rule by drama, not logic.
Yeah, there's a lot of drama.
That's why we need judges and lawyers that can figure this out, that the person is not all there and that they have a very, very negative agenda and they don't understand themselves the problems that are all around them, that they have anything to do with it. If there's a problem, it's never my fault. It's got to be your fault, or it's got to be their fault, but not me.
I mean, one of the things that a lot of those particular kind of parents have in common is the inability to critique their own behavior, to step outside of themselves and go, oh, I shouldn't have done that. Which is a normal, healthy, kind of self-moderating thing to do, but these folks can't do that. They can, they won't, whatever, but the ability to do that just is not there. But I think also I think those kinds of parents can even be doing this almost unconsciously. I mean, they believe it. They believe the stuff that, like Jane says, that they make up and then sort of carry on with that. And they make very believable witnesses because they believe it, even though they made it up. And they may not even realize that they made it up. But then I think you also have other parents that do it in a calculating way, that realize that what they say isn't true, and they're doing it for more really calculated reasons because they're trying to have financial gain or something like that, or revenge or something. So I think it can be the whole range.
Because that's an interesting question too. What are the causes, of the PAS? It's revenge. It's financial. It's
what are the
material,
causes of the parents that
affective.
do that?
Yeah. What have you found in your
It's
research?
always to have them end up in an advantage some way. And one advantage would be they've enmeshed with a child and they want that child to only love them and no one else. And another one, it could be a financial advantage where, if it's in the case of mothers, if there's a substantial amount of child support that subsidize their existence.
Or fathers too, because then it's child support they don't have to pay out. So it's money either way.
It goes both ways. Yeah, money, it could be. But also just having an inability to see the value of sharing.
Now that you mentioned father or mother, in the States, who has the strongest tendency to alienate the child, the father or the
both.
mother?
Now it's both.
I think it's about 50-50.
Because the custody in the States, I think you don't have the same problem like we have in Spain, that 98% of the custodies are given to the mother. Am I wrong?
No, you're right. It's not anywhere near that. It's still not 50-50, but it's not 98% like you say.
Yeah.
But so I think it moves more in that direction. But as a consequence, I think fathers can just as easily be alienating parents now as mothers. And I think that's been that way for probably 10 years. It didn't start out that way.
So it does not depend on the sex, on the gender of the
What got
person.
Richard Gardner in trouble is that he told the truth as he knew it. And in 1980, when joint custody first became a reality in the United States, and then it started going from state to state. And I understand in Spain, you now have shared.
Now.
It's just beginning with one of your provinces. What do you say? States.
Aragon.
Aragon,
Right.
And then hopefully it'll move to the other states like it did in the United States. Let's see, I lost track
Well,
of that.
so because of that preset that it be mothers that have children, which we call the tender years doctrine, when mothers always got custody, then that began to change. Then mothers were more vulnerable, and Gardner believed that it was a tactic that developed as a consequence.
But I want to finish that thought, because Gardner, at that time in 1979 and earlier, there was no joint custody, so women had all the power and control over the child. There was no law that said it would be any different. So in the early years, there was a lot of women who had the children, you have to have the children in order for the brainwashing to occur. It was true that more women did the brainwashing and the alienation than men, and women's groups jumped on that and said he's biased against women without looking at the facts of the matter.
It was not a matter of the gender, but of having the custody.
Yeah,
the circumstance.
So
later
when men
on,
have the custody,
when more fathers got custody, lots more fathers,
right.
Then he said, well, it's about equal now, because men are quite capable of alienating as much as women are.
Absolutely.
This is very important. And what do you think all these radical feminists are against this syndrome?
I was hoping somebody could answer. I
Why?
think
Why this?
it's really irrational. I mean, it really is an irrational kind of, in my opinion. It threatens something within. The fact that it's got that much support with that many people is really bizarre. I think it's almost cult-like in that regard. I think.
Well, I think you had some leaders in the National Organization of Women in the United States, at least. The original women wanted they wanted equal pay for equal work. They wanted equality in terms of opportunity to go into different areas of work, jobs, and so on, jobs and college and opportunities that men had. And I was all for that. I hope, most everybody would be. But those original women that got that going, and they were very successful, they kind of faded away. And what took their place was not that. The women that took their place were they would say that men are batterers and predators on women and children. And that's their motto. And that's what they've spread, is that you can't trust men. That I think is their agenda, is don't trust men. It's because you're going to get beaten up, or you're going to be harmed in some way, and that they're going to hurt your children.
Which is just, to me,
it flies in the face
irrational.
Of evidence. It's irrational, but we seem to, as human beings, gravitate towards somebody to be afraid of. We have to be afraid of somebody in order to be okay. I don't. Maybe you could answer that one.
It's like having an enemy, so we have a reason to exist.
We have to be afraid of
that's
somebody.
Not it, but
many countries do.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
you need an enemy to survive.
Yeah, to sort of give you a meaning.
Exactly.
It's very easy to exploit fear in people, to exploit it when there's no.
And it really is a fear. That's one of the things Gardner said very clearly. It's so true. It is a fear-based dynamic. I mean, that fear is what the fuel of it. It drives the child. It drives everything around that, because the alienating parent is really a bully and intimidates. And what, frankly, you mentioned the feminist opposition to this really uses the same tactics as an alienating parent. I mean, they create falsehoods.
Yes,
they get other people to believe it. They make things up and keep saying it over and over again. And you have 2 people saying it, then 10 people saying it. Then if you have 20 or 100 saying it, well, it must be true, even though it's not based on any foundation whatsoever. So there's this hysterical kind of process that you see alienating parents do, and I think you see the people that are in my view, the irrational critics of parental alienation syndrome do the same thing.
I have to make this question, even if it can be a bit uncomfortable, but the feminists, one of the things they say about Dr. Gardner, it's about their tendency, or about he was a pedophile.
Which is the most absurd, ridiculous.
What's the basis?
I think it's just what I described. I think it's this hysterical kind of mythology that's created about him that would stop anyone. If you thought, oh my gosh, this guy's a pedophile. But I think it just got created enough, and enough people that wanted to believe something. But there's absolutely no foundation.
Did he ever had any legal problem about pedophile?
Never.
That he was ever involved in any case?
But
did he defend pedophile?
What he did do, wait a minute, there's another aspect to this.
But let me finish this one first. And the important point is, he clearly said that pedophilia is a serious psychiatric disorder.
Horrible.
You know, that was
very
yeah. So
Dr. Gardner said
absolutely yes. In all of his writing, he said nothing different about sexuality and human development than Freud did. He said, you know, but it got transformed into all these things that it really wasn't, and then it became a mantra that I think is just a battle cry.
Irrationally once and again.
Yes, and then there's enough voices in the chorus, it gets louder and louder, and that makes it sound more.
I think what set him up was that before the whole parental alienation thing arose as an issue, he was a premier expert on identifying children who had been molested, and he had written volumes on that subject. So from his writings, I think they were able to extrapolate things and then distort them. For example, one of the things that he said clearly was that if a culture has no rule against molesting children, then people will molest their children. It's kind of a straightforward, logical statement to make. But that particular statement was twisted into if people don't say it's wrong, then it's okay to do. So how they would take something you would say that would be very straightforward and twist it.
I understand.
And then it was tragic.
Oh. There was some, I can't remember who it was. It wasn't a Spanish Inquisition person. It was a French one, I think, that said, "Show me just one line of a man's writing, and I can find a reason to hang him."
Oh dear! How about a woman? Goes both ways.
Okay, let's say that we have a child that is suffering PAS. Okay, many people is going to watch this video, and many of them are going to be parents of an alienated child. What can we do with him or with her, with this child?
Stay in contact. Stay in contact. Stay in contact. Even if you don't think that your letters are getting through, or your birthday cards, or your phone calls, just continue to do that. And it's really important that even though a child is treating a parent very, very badly, that isn't their true self. That isn't what that child wants to do and never did want to do that. And so their true self has been overridden by this outrageous behavior. But deep down, they really want to know that that parent is there for them and loves them. And if the parent just gets so discouraged and goes away, then that severs that relationship because they won't have any context. So in any way that you can think of, if phone calls don't work anymore, then write letters, write cards, or find ways to somehow stay in contact with that child.
You can keep in mind, the child's been taught that parent that they don't see doesn't love them. That they're invariably taught that parent doesn't love them, they've abandoned them, they're defective in some way, and that, of course, the child takes that personally. They take that as being unlovable, that there's something wrong with them as a child because one of their parents doesn't love them. So sometimes well-meaning but misinformed people will advise parents in that situation, "Oh, don't make waves, just they'll come around," just sort of, and I hear that all the time by well-meaning neighbors, friends, family members, mental health professionals that don't understand this. They will say, "Well, don't make waves, he'll come around, just sort of back off a little bit and let."
That's a mistake.
It's a big mistake because what it does is feed into that belief that, well, gosh, he doesn't really care, because the child is being told, "Well, I don't know why your father didn't come. I'm sorry," and really, it's absolutely true. Yeah.
It's unbelievable.
And what can we do with the alienating parent? Let's say you are the father or the mother of a child that's being alienated. What can we do with the other part?
The thing I'm very interested in now is trying to get the courts to do something. I think the answer often has to do with the court, because you have to have a certain authority. You have to have the ability to raise the level of accountability. So I've recommended to courts very often that telephone conversations between a child and the other parent be able to be recorded. And as someone appointed by the court that'll either do one or two things. It'll make the conversation appropriate because the alienating parent knows that they're being recorded, or it'll provide information for the therapist to be able to help the child and so forth. So raising accountability is important, but also having sanctions for the parent and making it clear to the court what's going on. That's the hardest part, because the court goes into this situation just thinking that they're two equally culpable people. These two just can't get along, they can't communicate. So you have to really go out of your way to show the court that's not what's going on. There's one person that's setting it up, and then the other person either has the choice of reacting to it, and then they may look unreasonable because they're reacting to it, or if they don't react to it, then they are guilty of abandonment. So they're in a no. So you have to peel the onion so the court can understand what's going on. And once the court does, what I've found, when the judge really understands this, sort of, you can see the light bulb go on, and then they sort of begin to respond more helpfully.
I think that you have to keep in mind also that there are 3 levels of alienation. There is the mild, the moderate, and the severe. And in the mild and the moderate, those people can be reached. They still have a rational mind, that they're not obsessed. And in the mild, a lot of times all it takes is somebody to sit down with them, maybe a mediator or a parent education class, to teach them that this child, it's best for you if the child is shared. And this is how to share the child, so to bring some sensibility to it. And the moderate, they go ballistic every time they see the other person. People have a tendency to calm down and finally kind of get a grip, and the heat and the passion of the moment tends to settle down. But with the pathology of the obsessed alienator, it doesn't calm down. They're very disturbed, dangerous people. And that's an animal of another color, another type of thing, what to do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found while I've been here in Spain is I think Jayne Major thinks more about solutions and how do we solve the problem rather than how to escalate the problem. And I've taught parent education for years and years and years. The parents come with, whether it be from the Department of Children and Family Service or from family law, any number of different kinds of issues like that. And these are people that are taught what to do, how to be in a family, what is a healthy family. And many people have no clue what a healthy family is, what it means to do win-win problem solving, so I'm not having an advantage over you or you over me, and how to communicate in a way where you're actually talking about issues instead of trying to get one over. I know that a lot of parents have backed way off of the authoritarian method where I'm the boss, and I personally think that's a good thing. However, what's taken its place is a permissive way of raising children, well, whatever you think. And I think that never in the history of the world have we had a situation where children can determine so much about their own life without a parental guidance. And a judge is in a parental position over this family to say, this is what you have to do. You have to be an authority and help people understand the best way of doing things. So I think that parent education, anger management classes, and drug 12-step programs, alcoholics or drug anonymous programs are very valuable. And when you calm the thing down, give it some time, calm it down, work with the parents. Mediation is a wonderful way to go if it's mild or moderate. But if it's in the severe category, that's not going to work.
What do you suggest to do then in a severe case?
You have to go to a judge and you have to plead your case and make your case for a judge. And the judge has to be able to get it and rule according to the needs of the situation. But a lot of judges they're not up to speed on this at all.
No, that's true. And I think a lot of attorneys are pretty challenged about how to present cases like this in court. There are certain things lawyers are taught in law school that really do not work very well with this. And if you just sort of present one narrow part of the case at a time, it will go on forever and nothing will get resolved. So you really have to use some different strategies. So I think it's important that special methods be used to get the court to understand so the court can come up with the proper intervention, which may be a custodial change. And it may be different kinds of interventions that contain that or do that at least temporarily. I think the goal in the ideal situation is for the child to be able to have an unassaulted relationship with both their parents, and then to be able to develop critical thinking tools. Because just like Jayne was saying, I mean, good parenting teaches children to be independent and to individuate and have good boundaries and things like that. And this stuff is the opposite. Children are penalized for thinking independently, and they're penalized for being separate. They're penalized for not being who the parent wants them to be. So it's about as opposite of healthy as can be.
Good. Is there any other topic you would like to tell?
I'd like us to focus more on prevention.
Yes,
I remember
good idea.
that back when I started, I would go around to fathers groups.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah,
Jayne?
I focused on what are you going to do about it.
Yeah.
And I used to go to fathers groups and sit in on them and see how they talk to each other and so on. What I found is that there's this tendency of, this is my situation, it's terrible, and then somebody would do a topper and come on, oh, you think you got it so
you
bad.
Think that's bad. Wait to hear this.
Yeah, wait till you hear this. And then even the leaders would encourage that and add more on top of it. And it was so discouraging. It was just a very, very negative, terrible thing. And what I said was, hey, wait a minute, what are you going to do about it? Because that isn't doing anything about it. It's making everything worse. And come on over to, in my classes, everybody gets to share how bad and awful it is, but on the other hand, they get another spin on it, that how this can work out, what is possible here. Very different.
Yeah, I think support groups, which is really a lot of these things, can be very helpful or can be very unhelpful. I mean, I think there has to be that part of sort of getting all that out, but then you have to do something with it. I mean, there's an old hypnotic principle, that which you focus on gets larger. So if you focus only on how bad it is, guess what? It's just going to get more bad, and it's going to get worse and worse, but you have to get on the other side of it. So I think that's where some of the groups are very good for that and some are not. I think it just depends on the group and the
it's
understanding
a lonely,
about that.
lonely thing to go through this parent alienation.
Yeah.
It's horribly... But pretty soon, all your relatives, your friends, and everybody, they don't want to hear it anymore because nobody knows what to do.
Oh, and you show up at the kid's school, your child's school, and you feel given the cold shoulder because bad things have been said about you to the teachers and to the school administration, and then you go to the doctor because your child hasn't, and then the doctor doesn't treat you the same way because they've been told all kinds of untrue things and on and on and on. You. Yes, and so you begin to feel this, and you begin to almost get kind of paranoid about what does everybody think, and oftentimes they are thinking things because they've been told all this propaganda. So that's very lonely. That creates a lot of loneliness.
Yeah, they need a place to go where they can just vent.
It creates a lot of loneliness.
Yes, but I think the connecting up, as people do in different support groups and also organizations that are addressing this, that's one of the functions they do, is to not be alone with that and to recognize that I'm not the only one going through this. But I think, like Jayne said, you have to go to the next level. You have to go, okay, fine, now let's go to what are we going to do about it in a positive way.
Is that right? Yes. I agree. Okay. What about the DSM-5?
It's a really thick book. and it's...
I tried to learn it once, but I couldn't.
As you know, it's being considered for inclusion. Yeah. And they reorganize the thing every time they write it, every decade, which is how often they write it. And so that is still sort of up for grabs. It won't be for 2 more years until it's finally... published.
We know.
And it's hard to say. It's hard to say. There are lots of... It's a very slow, conservative process to... because it has to do with scientific information, so it oftentimes takes a very long time to get into those... something like the DSM. I mean, there are lots of things in the DSM that are not included in the DSM, rather, that are sort of everyday parlance, like battered spouse syndrome, that's not in there, and Munchausen's by proxy is not in there, and all kinds of things like that.
Battered women is not in there either, and it exists.
Yeah.
Battered men.
Yeah, exactly.
But right now, there's a big effort to lobby the committee for the DSM-5 to write your experience and what you think ought to happen. Both sides, pro and con, calling it parental alienation syndrome or not, or including parental alienation in the DSM-5. A lot of us have a vested interest that it is included because it will do a whole different shaping of this issue if it is included, and recommending that people, Dr. Bill Burnett, how do you pronounce it? Burnett?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
At Vanderbilt University is a psychiatrist that has mobilized people to write to the committee members and say, this is what's happened to me.
Is Dr. Bill Burnett?
Yes.
Which university?
Vanderbilt.
I can send you Vanderbilt.
Yeah.
Which one,
I can
sorry?
send you.
Vanderbilt University.
Vanderbilt.
VA.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
Okay.
I can send you the information on it. In fact, it was passed out at the Congress.
I'll Google it. Yeah.
Okay.
Good.
I mean, I think it's a big. I think it is important to there be a push for that, because there's a push in the opposite direction as well. I mean, it's got this strange political quality to it that's really kind of hard to wrap my mind around.
The thing about
really.
parental alienation is very divisive.
Yeah.
It's people taking highly polarized sides from each other in a culture of blame. If you hadn't have done this, or you hadn't have done, it's where's the logic? Where's the proof? And that's why we need to have that in the DSM-5.
When I was in graduate school, we were operating under the DSM-2, I believe. It was about that thick.
Yeah,
it got thicker,
I
then it
remember.
got thicker. Right.
DSM-2,
And
3.
at that time, post-traumatic stress disorder was a novel, untested category.
Yeah.
And it was a bit controversial. That was in the Vietnam era time. And it came, PTSD is now considered the gold standard of what happens when people are traumatized. But at that time, there was debate. A lot of people, oh no, it's a mood disorder, it's this or that. And so that just, I think, shows how it goes through a process. I mean, the DSM-2 ego-dystonic homosexuality was a pathology.
True.
And the DSM-1 homosexuality was a pathology.
Yeah.
And then
And it
it
was
just went
wiped
through.
out.
Yeah, exactly. So it goes through different processes having to do with social reality, but also just it's a conservative process that takes a while. So.
Very good. Something else?
Well, I'm very struck with how motivated and passionate people are here.
Yeah.
It's,
Well, here we
it's a passionate culture anyway. Well, I mean, I would think that would have a dramatically accelerating effect on the whole parental alienation dynamic with that kind of weapon at hand. You know, that's very powerful.
And in Aragon, even when there are good news that they are going to start having the shared custody, it's having this other law.
Can just cut the legs out from under
it can
that.
highlight all the false denounces, to man. It can be a
I see.
sword.
Yeah.
It can be even worse for man.
Yeah.
Because right now, if you denounce the man because of domestic violence, automatically the custody is blocked until the things clear out. This can take 1 year or more.
Oh, yes.
And in a year, a child can be easily alienated.
Oh, in much less than
I
a year.
think that we have to do a better job of educating people about the importance of fathers in a child's life.
Yeah.
That's where this has to go. Is that there was a point in the feminist movement way back where the role of the father was diminished. There was this kind of homogenizing the men and the women and their roles and so on, and it blurred over the incredible importance of what a father offers a child that a mother can't offer a child.
Yeah.
And it's more than just taking care of a child and feeding them and dressing them and bathing them and that kind of thing. Anybody could do that. But it's that dynamic, that wonderful energy that gets shared between a loving mother and a loving father to a child. It can't be replaced by just one parent. A child is really lost a lot when they take the father out of the equation.
I believe so.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's why it was my conference, in fact. Remember, was the value of a father.
Yes.
Something else? Well, we're more than 20 minutes, nearly 50. But
Well, you get us started on this, and it's hard to shut us up, you know. You may have noticed that.
okay, good. Perfectly. Okay.
Thank you.
Very good.